YouTube. I just got my hands on this Leagues of Votann army set, and in this video I'm going to share with you how to speed paint this box and get it on the tabletop in just a few days. A little bit about me: I'm mainly a tabletop gamer, but I also enjoy painting. I do see miniatures as game pieces that are meant to be played on the tabletop. It may be just me, but I really hate fielding unpainted armies. So I make it a point to always fully paint my armies before I play them. People have asked me, how do I paint my armies up so quickly? And that's what spurred me to make these videos. I'm going to teach you some methods and techniques that you can use to help you get your armies fully painted. I will leave a link to my Instagram account in the description below. Check it out. Getting right into it, I clip off all the parts that I'm going to be working with my hobby clippers. Next, I remove sprue residue and mold lines with my knife. I prefer to use a box cutter, but I know a lot of people use hobby knives. But either way, I use a paring motion that allows me to apply very specific pressure, and I found this method to be very precise and controllable. Next, I put the parts together with super glue. Don't put too much, a little bit does go a long way. The instructions that came with the kit are really easy to follow, but don't let this stop you from customizing and making everything your own. Here I'm putting together the caul, but instead of using the standard head that comes with it, I use one of the female heads from the other sprues, just to customize things a little bit, make it my own. One of my time-saving methods is to build everything all at once. I batch built one type of unit that I'm going to paint. In this case, it's going to be infantry for this video. And the one thing you'll notice is that I put on every part. I super glue it on, the arms, the head. I know a lot of people will paint these parts separately in order to get paint on every bit of the part, but I feel that that method really slows me down. Fully assembled models are easier to hold and paint. While I'm building, I like drilling out gun barrels. It doesn't have to be very elaborate, but what I do is I use a hobby drill, like this Citadel drill, and I use the smallest bit. And what I do is, as I'm building the model, if I come across a gun barrel, I just go ahead and try to center the best I can, and I just bore a very shallow hole. It doesn't need to be very deep. It just needs to give you an illusion of a muzzle. It's fairly quick to do, and I don't feel that it takes away a lot of time from the overall process. I have fully assembled 22 models, which I will batch paint all at once. When deciding on a color scheme, it's probably easiest just to go with whatever is in the codex. Although I was drawn towards the Trans-Hyperion Alliance, I decided to come up with my own color scheme of yellow and green. Based on my color scheme, I have picked a white primer that I will be applying with my airbrush. I'm priming the miniature from all directions, and I try to get into the hard-to-reach places with the airbrush. My preferred method is to prime with an airbrush, but you can also use a spray can primer from Army Painter, Citadel, or similar. There are also brush-on primers. Priming is an important step. It allows the rest of the paint that comes afterwards to stick to the model. As a standard practice in all my videos, I batch paint, or in this case, batch prime everything. It is a major time saver. So the color scheme I picked was yellow and army green. So since yellow is the predominant color on my models, I combine 50% of my acrylic paint with 50% of flow improver. And then I stir it up just to make sure everything's combined. Similar to priming, I put the main base coat all over the model, again from underneath, from overhead, from the sides, literally everywhere. As you notice, I'm not careful about where it goes. At this point, I just coat the entire model. So if there's any other colors that are going to be on the model, I don't worry about it for now. I will paint over this base coat once I get to the brushing step. As before, you want to get into the hard to reach areas with your airbrush. Give it a nice full coat all the way around and do all your models at once. Like everything I do, I batch paint. Batch painting is the key to painting fast and fielding fully painted armies. Now on to brushwork. I start with barbarian flesh and I'll put it on the heads of the models. I tend to lock my hands together like this to create a stable painting platform, so if you have shaky hands, this helps stabilize it. You'll also notice that I'm able to get into the hard to reach places fairly easily by using a fairly small tip brush. This is much faster than painting the heads separately. Next, I use army green for all the fabric portions. And I lay it down with a medium brush, and the key here is try to get as much paint on the model as quickly as possible, but at the same time have a fine enough tip that you can get into the little spaces if you need to. Here's another time-saving method. If you made a mistake and you just laid down some paint, clean your brush, make it a little bit wet, and you can remove the water-soluble acrylic paint from the part. This prevents you from waiting for the part to dry and then painting over it, and again, this saves time. The next color up is dark stone, which I will be putting on the boots, the gloves, and the pads. So here I use a medium brush again so that I can put down a lot of paint quickly on the boots, and then I move on to the knee pads and again apply fairly generously. Now Army Painter does settle into the crevices really well, so even if you put it on slightly thick, it actually settles really well towards the end. Now I go to the elbow pads, I apply the same thing, and then with the same brush I also lay down some on the gloves. Next, I switch to matte black. This is the color I'm going to put on the weapons. I use a medium or even a slightly larger brush to apply generous amounts onto the weapon. Now, one thing that I do is I tend to single coat. I don't put multiple coats of the same color. This saves time, and also later on when you wash the model, a lot of the imperfections from the single coat will get covered by the wash, which I will show you later in this video. As you can see here, even though the model is fully assembled, I'm able to get the black into crevices in the model fairly easily with the correct size brush. At this point, I have all my three major colors done, and I'm moving on to accents. Here, I'm painting gunmetal on all the silver surfaces that I want, like the piping, on the guns, and so on. And the thing about accents is that it allows you to create interest on your model. And accent colors shouldn't be overused. You should use them only in a few areas and not in big areas. I now use leather brown on all the belts, the pouches, and the gun sheath. To make my characters more special, I used weapon bronze as kind of a darker version of gold. That's kind of my cheat, to make gold look a little bit darker. I decorate the parts that look like runes on the model with this paint. To make my characters look more special, I reserve this color only for them. I do not put it on the regular troops. This makes them look a little bit more special. To add more interest to the model, I'm adding white stripes onto the tops of the helmets and also into the shoulder pads. On the shoulder pads, it will allow me to later apply a runic symbol right on the white area. It'll make it pop much better. Also, as you notice, the white contrasts, it's a very subtle contrast, but it contrasts against the yellow, and it makes the figure a little bit more interesting to look at instead of just a huge yellow part. So the white breaks it up a little bit. Another fun accent activity is to paint different hair colors or even skin colors if you want to do that as well. But I decided to give my call, basically make her a redhead. So as you can see, I'm putting some orange for her hair, and then you can vary it for the rest of the troops. For instance, you can do a dark brown or a light brown or a blonde. In this case, I didn't do blonde because my armor is already yellow, and to have yellow hair just looks like, yeah, you missed something. So I kind of stayed away from that color, but I used black, I used browns, and it's really fun. It gives your models variety just by changing the color of their hair. Next, for something a little bit different, I'm using Turbo Dark Paint to paint this, I'm guessing is a drone, his domed helmet. So I undercoated black and then I put 2 or 3 layers. This is one of those cases where I actually do more layers because layers look better in certain cases. For this Turbo Dark Paint, I actually put 2 or 3 layers just to get that sheen, but it gives that helmeted dome a nice shiny look. The next accent color, I use Void Shield Blue, which is a nice bright blue that I add to all the screens on the arms, and also that little flashlight feature right in the middle. I decided to make that blue, and also I used the blue on the visors of the enclosed helmets. The helmets themselves is silver, and I put that little blue line across it, which is, I'm guessing, where the troopers will look out from. Here I'm going to try to paint the little blue flashlight behind this trooper's gun, but wait a minute, I can't get to it. What's going on here? Well, here's a pro tip. If you can't see it, don't paint it. It's also another time saver. You saw me demonstrate everything on one model, but really you should be batch painting, which means if you have one color, paint the one color on the one feature on all the models before switching to the next color, and then doing all the models with that color. You might notice that I hold all my models by its base. I do not use a paint handle like this one from Citadel. I find that holding it by the base allows me to paint much faster and switch out miniatures quicker. Here are the 22 models, all base coated, using batch painting. This looks pretty flat right now, but once the washes go on, it should pop. Onward to washes. I'm going to use Flesh Wash for the skin and Strong Tone for everything else. Army Painter Strong Tone is a very good wash that I use very often. I start with the Flesh Wash on the faces and on the hair. I apply generous amounts, allowing it to pool into the recesses. I use Flesh Wash on skin just to give the skin a little bit of a brighter appearance. A lot of times, strong wash is too much for skin, makes it too dark. Using Strong Tone on the rest of the model is brilliant. Army Painter makes a really good wash that settles into crevices and makes nice, crisp shadows. As you can see here, you want to apply generous amounts on areas to allow the wash to pool into the recesses. And you can control the amount of wash that goes on the model by painting it over with the brush again. So if it pools too much in certain areas, you would take your brush and you would move it off of those areas. Like for instance, in the white areas here, I've noticed that it's starting to pool a little bit too much. So later on, I just kind of go back with my brush and get rid of some of the extras on the shoulder pads, on the helmets, just by brushing over it again to redirect the wash where I want it to go. Like before, batch painting, I apply the washes to all the models all at once, and I continue doing this until all of them are done. And at the end, what used to be a flat base coated part with washes begins to look like this, where it has depth and shadow. So on to the topic of layering and highlighting. I know that Games Workshop does it and a lot of artists out there do it, but I'll be blunt, I do not. The only times I ever do highlight or make anything a little bit brighter is like for instance here, where the white stripe was a little bit dulled by the wash. I would apply a little bit more white to it just to brighten it up a little bit. In place of highlighting, I'm in favor of dry brushing. I use a makeup brush like this one, and in this case I am using Army Painter Gray. I wipe off most of it until there's a very light residue left on the brush. After that, I use it to highlight the matte black guns that I painted. Because matte black absorbs a lot of light, there's not much detail when you look at it. But if you put a light, dry brush on it, it adds that highlighting effect without adding a lot of time to your process. Another fun activity is detailing work. Here I'm putting some Void Shield Blue on any of the plasma guns. My Call has a plasma gun, and I'm going ahead and putting this light blue on it and then applying blue tone into the recesses. So this gives it a blue hue instead of putting strong tone, which would have made it brown. So having different kinds of washes, like in this case, can be very beneficial in giving it a different look. Here is a quick way of emulating the red hot blades that the Votann have. So what I first do is lay down some white on the axe, followed by a fairly wet layer of yellow. So this is somewhat like layering, but slightly easier. And then followed by orange. And as you notice, I always make sure that the previous color is still showing behind it. And then at the very end, I apply some red. Now, as you can see, it's a little uneven, so it takes a little bit of wet blending of all the colors and a few applications of all three colors, even 4 colors, to make it all look natural and good. This takes a little bit of trial and error, and this is probably the slowest part of the process. I usually don't mind taking a little bit of time to do this because it makes the characters a little bit more special. Now this is the part that a lot of people dread, the eyes. Now I came up with a method that I will share with you here, making eyes actually really simple to do. Use your smallest brush and with properly thinned white paint, slowly apply it into the eyes of the model like you see here. Now you remember that one method of erasing by using a cleaned brush. As you can see, I overshot on some of the white on this model, and I'm using that erasing technique to get it off the areas that I didn't want the white to go on. Like in this case, below the eyes, and then I kind of boo-booed here a little bit and it got on the forehead. But again, using the clean brush, I'm able to get rid of that mistake fairly easily. To complete the eyes, use a toothpick. Toothpicks usually have a blunter end and a sharp end. Use the sharp one. What you will do is you would dip it in some black paint and then very carefully put a dot right on the eyes. Sometimes you have to oversaturate the toothpick a little bit to have it lay down well. This is a very fast method to get eyes done. As you can see, this was done with almost no effort. And one of the tips that I would give is when you put the first dot down on the first eye, be mindful of where that eye is looking, and on the other eye, try to mimic that position. So for instance, if it's looking up, have both eyes look up. If it's looking left, have both eyes look left. I clean up my bases by using some black primer and a brush, and I paint around the rim of the bases. And usually I just leave it black after I base this. But if you want, you can always paint on top of the primer once it dries, paint it brown or green. But personally, for time savings, I just leave it black. It really doesn't bother anyone, doesn't take away from the model, so I just leave the rims of my bases black. Here are the fully painted models. All that's left to do is add decals and basing. So at this point, you can give your brushes a rest, put everything aside, and get ready to do some water transfers and basing. For water transfers, cut out the ones that you want to use and dip them into a container of water for about 5 to 6 seconds. Then using a pair of tweezers, go ahead and lift them out and place them on the table for another 5 to 6 seconds. That should be enough to free the transfers from the paper. While you're waiting, go ahead and grab Microset, which you can buy on Amazon. And what you would do is you would use a little bit of Microset and put it on the shoulder pad that you want to put the decal. Go ahead and transfer. There's really 2 methods that I'll show you. One is transferring the decal onto your brush, like so. And you would bring it up to the model and place it with the brush in the area that you want to. The fact that it's got Microset on the shoulders, the decal will naturally want to transfer onto the shoulder because of the surface tension of the liquid. And then once it's on the shoulder, you can use a brush to adjust it into the position that you want it to be in. Another method for applying decals is to put the decal sheet right next to the area you want to transfer to, and using the brush, push it onto the area, and then again, use the brush to adjust the decal to where you want it. Moving over to the other shoulder, using the same method, I applied the decal for the Trans-Hyperion Alliance. For the basing step, I use this from Frontline Gaming. It's dark soil, which looks like a dark material which will complement the colors that I use. You can use Elmer's glue, or in this case I'm using something similar from the dollar store. It works just the same, to be honest with you. It saves you some money. And I put 2 dollops, one front, one rear, on the base. And then using a brush that I don't particularly care about, it could be an older brush, I even out the Elmer's glue all over the base like so. You want to make sure that you cover all the surface so that when you base it later, there aren't any bare spots. After that, I just dip the base into the basing material, and the material will basically stick to the base. I prefer doing this instead of the more elaborate basing techniques. I feel that this has a good finished look without spending too much time. At the end of the day, you want your miniature to stand out, not necessarily the basing. And here we are at the end. All the warriors painted up. Iron Her Champion. And finally, the Decal. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell icon so you don't miss out on any new content. Look out for part 2 of this video where I paint up the Pioneers. See you then.